thank you so much for being with us, Vanessa. It's great to connect with you. I'd love for you to maybe just start out by introducing yourself and just kind of generally what your involvement with or your role with World Vision Canada is right now.
So my name is Vanessa Saraiva. I sit on the advocacy and government engagement team as their government engagement lead. So my role really involves ensuring that we're positioning World Vision Canada with our best foot forward when it comes to engagement with Global Affairs Canada.
And I understand you've been with World Vision for a number of years. Just briefly, kind of what's some of that, the highlights or some of the things that you've been involved in different roles?
Sure, yeah. So I started my original start date with World Vision Canada is back in 2011. I was on the humanitarian and emergency affairs team as a program officer before moving overseas with World Vision International, where I was in a few roles in South Sudan as the protection and gender advisor, as the program director, and then moving to the DRC, still with World Vision, based in Goma as their humanitarian and protection advocacy advisor. So, yeah, it's been a long time with World Vision between the various roles. I'm assuming closing in on, 12 or 13 years or so in humanitarian and development settings.
Wow. You talked about being in South Sudan, DRC. And you alluded to being part of crisis response. What is it like as a humanitarian when you're in somewhere already and a crisis hits? What does that look like?
A lot of the places that I worked and lived in, I responded and dealt a lot with chronic emergencies. So this would be areas in conflict or post-conflict settings where there would be, a sudden increase in violence, for example, or exchange of warfare and conflict, right? So, in that immediate aftermath, the primary responsibility is to make sure that everyone is safe. And then how that impacts programs with respect to safety is also, whether you need to hibernate programs, take a pause, make sure that everyone is okay, make sure that it's safe to continue to operate, not only for staff and partners, but especially for communities that are looking to you to receive resources, whichever that might be, your programs, right? Whether it's food or water or a child-friendly space, like whatever the intervention might be. If it's not safe to operate, then of course we don't until things subside, and neither communities nor humanitarian workers are put at risk. So that's really the type of work that I've been involved in.
Hmm. So what's a moment? Can you reflect on your time at maybe DRC or South Sudan? I know both are fragile contexts. Is there a moment that sticks out with you as sort of where a crisis happened, or just a moment that really kind of defines your humanitarian fieldwork?
So interestingly, to your question, as much as my professional experience has been in conflict and post-conflict settings, when I was in the DRC, we did have a natural disaster occur, which is slightly different than what
Oh,
you just
wow.
asked me. So I do
Yeah.
apologize, but
No,
um,
no, that's a crisis as well. So anything. Yeah.
we actually the volcano in Goma erupted,
Ah,
and so I personally, and this it's so interesting being a humanitarian because I wanted to run towards and make sure that everyone is okay. However, if you're familiar with Goma, I was on the other side of the lake. I was in a town called Bukavu, and was having a personal weekend. I mean, we're entitled to our personal
mhm.
lives when we're living overseas, and I was doing or watching the gorillas. It was a gorilla sanctuary, and so
Amazing.
we were there, and started in the evening. It happened, I believe, on a Saturday night. But then in the evening, calls started coming in and colleagues, and there was movement of the volcano, and then there was fissures, and there was an eruption, and the lava was coming down. Um, that that sticks out for me because I wasn't in Goma.
Oui.
And it was just a boat ride away, but I really wanted to be close to the staff, like the people that I had worked with, my friends, my colleagues, the other international staff that I was living with, like on the compound. But you manage that by being a support to colleagues. So if I give you a practical example, I had a friend send me a message and say, like if something were to happen to me, like this is what I want you to tell my family. So carrying the weight of that was difficult. And that's just like on the personal level. But of course, when I think of more importantly, the staff that work in Goma and work in DRC, like my Congolese friends and colleagues whose houses were destroyed by the lava, who were displaced, and they're, they were equal parts. How can I serve my community and how can I take care of my own family? And that's something that humanitarians, particularly local staff, like national staff, like these, honestly, they're the real superheroes at this
Mhm.
of this day when we talk about World Humanitarian Day. That they're probably the most selfless people I've ever met in my life. Every single colleague I've had, because they're more concerned about how to respond to their community, how to do right by their community, how to make sure that everyone has what they need and everyone is safe, but they themselves also are being impacted, right? So we had staff that were displaced, staff that couldn't go to their homes because of the lava, needing advances to make sure that they could purchase things in the market. We dealt with, having temporary displacement of our staff and our operations. So I actually did go back to Goma as planned on the Monday or the Sunday, I should say. But then everyone was redisplaced again to Bukavu as the lava continued to come. So after that happens, actually a volcano eruption, there's earthquakes. So we had days, and particularly when I went back to Goma, and I could still feel these in Bukavu where we were, but when I went back to Goma for those few days before being displaced once more, we had hundreds of earthquakes a day. And so you just, you ended up working through it because, of course, we're putting together a response plan. We're reaching out to support offices and to the global community to say this is what's going on. We are planning for needs assessments. We're, of course, making sure that all of our staff is accounted for and safe. And at one point in the compound, we were working outside as opposed to inside the building in case it were to come down. We're working outside, but then thought, this is also kind of silly because we're quite close to the building. I don't think we'd be safe here. And it's just, again, it's that dichotomy of I really want to do what's best for these communities, but now my safety is also threatened.
Mhm.
So I think we had like a particular second marker. I can't even remember how long it was. Certain things I think I intentionally forget as a coping mechanism.
Sure.
But, if an earthquake lasts for like X number of seconds, then pack up and move. But if it's under that threshold, then just work through it. We'll be fine. This is not professional advice. Please, no
Yeah.
one do
Yeah.
this if you feel, if you actually feel an earthquake, don't do that. But when you get like a hundred a day a night, and you're sleeping, and you're like, am I getting out of bed for this or not? Not today. Maybe
So
later.
it's amazing how your perspective can shift and your almost your criteria shifts, right? Like if we were sitting here right now and there was an earthquake, like sorry, but I'm gonna get out of here. Like I'm gonna protect myself. But like
Yep.
you said, in these contexts, sometimes your perspective totally changes and your reality changes and you have to adjust that. That this transitions really well to, I think it'd be really great to kind of hear, you've alluded to a little bit of this, like emotionally, mentally,
Mm-hmm.
um, the toll that these times can take, and just you're in a different country. There's the unfamiliarity there. There's all those things, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
the fragile context, and then as you're alluding to, like there's on top of that, there's natural disasters. There's just so many layers to juggle. How how is that how does that sit with you emotionally and mentally, and how do you
Yeah.
cope with that and process those things either in the moment, or is it
Mhm.
one of those things where you kind of have to set aside and come back to it later?
I set aside and come back to it later,
Yeah.
particularly when you're in like those fight or flight responses. I compartmentalize and I will
Hmm.
come back to that later. And what personally that looks like for me is journaling. I love journaling when I need to work through thoughts and feelings and experiences. Um, Mental health and therapy is really important. So that's been accessible to us. I mean, like, humanitarian workers that live and work overseas. So that's really important to take advantage of the resources that we're privileged to have access to. Um, and community. Community for me is really important. So I'm telling you these things because you're asking, and it's important for like the broader message of this day. But typically, these stories are reserved for my friends and my colleagues who are also humanitarians who have similar understanding and similar experiences. So we celebrate and commiserate together. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and obviously you've spent extended periods of time. I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit with World Vision, but usually week or two at a time. But I find, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, like I find when I'm there, and because it's a shorter period of time, it's easy for me, or easier to kind of set aside the emotional and mental impact. But it
mhm.
means that when I come back, I almost, people talk about culture shock. I find reverse culture shock is often a bigger deal for me. I'm curious your thoughts on that, of like in the moment in that country, you're kind of just working and you can focus on a task,
Yep.
but coming home and coming back to the reality that you
Yep.
are used to living if when in Canada or wherever else it may be,
hmm
how that sits with you, and it can be a challenge.
I feel like I felt reverse culture shock once. I went to Bangladesh, so that was my first exposure to extreme poverty, and I think I was still in university. I think it was my last year or so. And so, this young 20 something thing going over to Bangladesh and understanding what poverty and humanitarian need was for the first time, witnessing it firsthand, writing about it, wanting to be a voice for World Vision and to engage the Canadian public and to speak out about what that meant. I felt like when I was in Bangladesh, I was doing something productive and important every single day.
Mhm.
When I came back and I went to Yorkdale for whatever reason, on an errand, like whatever it was, I couldn't understand how people could just go about their lives when a child's life was completely different on the other side of the planet. That was when I really struggled with it. Um, I'm not sure it happened again, either because I compartmentalize really well, or as I said, with like my coping mechanisms, I really lean on the people who have that shared understanding. So, I mean, certainly there have been some trips and some experiences that have been really difficult. And I have a few people who, again, in this space and were part of my safe space, and they're the ones that I lean on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks. Um, and I assume you probably learn and process with the local staff too. They're living in these environments and have been for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that community and dynamic is very helpful while you're there.
Yeah, 100%. As I said, they're the real superheroes. I mean, the drivers who make sure that they keep you safe when you're on these long treks and you're going through these sometimes unsafe areas and you have to facilitate or negotiate access to make sure you're able to go from point A to point B. Security staff, like the frontline staff, like the people that are actually doing the distributions, for example, the people that are facilitating trainings at a water point, the staff whose responsibility is to seek community acceptance from local leaders, those are the staff that this day is all about, and that we really need to celebrate.
Hmm. And with that, that leads into my next question really well. Obviously you play a part, the local staff plays a part. The communities also play an important part in the development process and making sure that the work that's being done is actually led by them, because then it's most effective. What does that look like? What does it look like with a community to make sure that they're leading the charge in development and having input in that?
Sure. Needs assessments, right? Agreeing on what your project intervention is going to look like, but making sure that the people that are making the decisions and designing that project are part of the community and are led by the community, right? Like that, um, that's the part that's really important when we're talking about projects and programming. And is it the right project? Is it the right program? I mean, sure, everyone has their particular value adds. Like I bring a particular value when I'm, helping to design a project that's focused on gender-based violence, for example, or case management of separated children. I might bring a technical lens that is important to connect what the donor priority is together with what the need is in the community. But it's the community that really has a true understanding of what's going on in their lives and their children's lives and how problems can be solved. When I lived overseas, I remember starting every single training that I was facilitating with a hand raising exercise where I said, who knows more about country X that I was in, like near you, right? Like, who knows more about this situation near you? Here's what I can bring to the table, but you're not here to listen to me. We're here to exchange in a dialogue. And it's hard in some of these communities because of the impacts of colonization and all these things. So it's very much like top down. Someone is speaking, you listen, or you have this Western expatriate come like, oh, listen, like she knows all. And that is a feeling that I've never gotten over. I 100% have always felt really uncomfortable with that. And it was my priority and objective whenever I had the opportunity to always disrupt that narrative, and really attempt to feel like we were having a dialogue and to make sure that other people in the room knew that they were valued, they were respected, they were subject matter experts when it came to their communities and their kids and the topic at hand.
You've shared, some stories from DRC. I know you spent time in South Sudan as well. I'm curious if there's a moment that kind of sticks out to you, or a person that you've met that sticks out to you from that time.
Yeah, when I was in South Sudan, we worked with UNICEF on this program to reunite children formerly associated with armed groups and armed forces, in layman's terms, child soldiers,
Yeah.
with their families. And so that reunification looks like identifying like the child and the family, making sure we bring them home and that they have separated from the group, but then also equipping them for success, making sure that they have resources to restart their lives after being part of these different groups. Some of these kids were taken when they were, quite young, 12, 13 years old. And the one particular boy that I'm thinking of when I tell this story, I met him when he was 18 years old. He had been part of the armed group, one of the armed groups. He was an older brother. I believe I met three of his siblings, I think two sisters and a little brother as well. And he was telling us about the bad things that he had done while he was part of this group. And, something that stuck out to me was the dichotomy of what he was saying, the bad things that he had to do and was forced to do, but the remorse and the language that he was using, not being able to make eye contact when he was sad about a story or when he was shameful or regretful about a story, like just unbelievable remorse for what he had done. And it didn't match, the actions didn't match the boy that was standing in front of me who was playing with his siblings. We let him borrow our camera. And so he was taking pictures of his siblings. Their Vaughn was there braiding their hair. And so I asked this boy, it sounds like, what you did wasn't right. Like, how did you come to know that? Because you were taken so young. And he just said, my mom didn't raise me that way. I was raised with a lot of love, and that's not what she taught me. And so for him to have held on to that, these years of being away, and then to be reunited with his family and with his siblings and his mom, and to see them enjoy a meal together, to know that he was part of our vocational skills training group, so that he would have a business or a small business enterprise and have some money and opportunity to work moving forward. That's one of the ones that sticks to me. His kind, pure heart.
Wow. And that is so emblematic of the important work that World Vision does about not just kind of in that moment, reuniting the child with his family. Obviously, that's a huge, important step. But like you talked about, like, okay, now moving forward, here's some vocational training so that you can start to earn some income and provide, and it puts them on a completely different trajectory. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing.
And the work, I mean, like the reunification looks different for every kid. It's individualized to their needs. I mean, some kids are younger, so they want to go back to school and are able to go back to school. So that's one step that's also taken. A core piece of all of this, and a requirement in all the programming that we do, is a focus on their mental health and psychosocial support. So working with case managers and social workers to make sure that they're able to process those feelings of things that had done or been done to them, but also what it means to go back to a community that may or may not accept you, the work that we have to do with the community as well. So yeah, the mental health and psychosocial support part of that is profound. Yeah.
Just one thing too, you touched on in there, you kind of alluded to, and I think especially with World Humanitarian Day, we're working with World Vision, but you mentioned that World Vision was coordinating with UNICEF, and I've seen the work World Vision does with other organizations in these countries. That might be something that people aren't aware of, right? We kind of generally think of different, think of them as companies and they're competing with each other and all those things, but there's a lot of work that happens together. Can you speak to some of your experience with that briefly, of the importance of working together with other NGOs and the different skills and experience that those NGOs bring together?
Sure, absolutely. What that looks like practically is what in the humanitarian space we call the cluster system. So if you are working, let me try to bring this down to Canada, for example. So we're working in the GTA. In the GTA, so to speak, you're going to have clusters that are technically focused. So you would have your health cluster, or you'd have your food security, your nutrition, your water, your child protection, etc. Right? All the different technical areas that we work in. So if you are an organization that is working in, these respective technical areas, and you don't have to work in all of them, right? It goes by what you are skilled in, what you're equipped with, etc. Then you're coordinating with others so that there's no overlap. And if there is overlap, it's complementary, right? Because we've talked about how resources are narrowing. Resources have always been really important, but we want to make sure that collectively our global community has the greatest impact in the communities that we're working in. So these clusters are really important to say, this organization is doing this in this area, So World Vision is doing this in Juba of South Sudan. Um, Organization X is doing this also in Juba. Let's make sure that they talk to each other. Let's make sure that beneficiaries have the greatest access to these different communities, and that there's complementary programming and availability of resources.
Hmm. One of the places that I saw it really notably was in refugee camps in South Sudan, and it was amazing to see. You've got this very complex system going on. It's a mini city, right? And so you had one NGO was handling the healthcare for that refugee camp. One was the food distribution. One was creating child-friendly spaces for the children. And that allows that camp to become, a mini city with all the resources that a mini city or large city would
Yeah,
need. So it's very, very important that takes
absolutely.
place.
Yeah. It also facilitates referrals too, right? Like when you're part of these cluster systems, that also means that, oh, I know that this organization is providing, water in this area. I'm not providing water, but I know to tell this community or this individual person, right? That might be receiving nutrition services from World Vision here, but they also need a food point or water access. I know that this organization is working here providing that, right? So it also supports the referrals and making sure that that individual person, their family, has access to all the inputs that the global community is bringing.
As we're having this conversation, World Humanitarian Day is coming up. Why is that day important? Why should people listening, why should we care about that time?
Sure. I mean, so World Humanitarian Day is really a time and a day and a space to honor lives lost. Um, And it's about advocating for the survival, well-being, and dignity of people that have been affected by crisis, and for the safety and security of aid workers. And again, like, please keep in mind that as we're talking about this, when I say aid workers, the people most at risk um, of harm occurring are national staff, right? Those staff, I've called them superheroes, I will continue to call them superheroes, really need to be uplifted. So yeah, this day is really about coming together to honor the important work that is done. As I said before, these people who who live in these communities, who might also be experiencing different levels of poverty or different levels of need, um, but then also work to serve those same communities because they want
Hmm.
what's best for others. And sometimes, having an NGO in a community is an opportunity to, um, you know, bring resources to that community. By that, I mean, like, there's job prospects, right?
Hmm.
But for other people, and I would say the overwhelming majority of people that I've met and that I've worked with, there's also a deep yearning and conviction within them. It goes beyond it being a paycheck, but there's a deep yearning and conviction to do better for their communities and to lift their communities out of poverty and want to see the realization of human rights.
Hmm. The theme this year is strengthening global solidarity and empowering local communities. You've touched on some of these things already, but I'm curious what you see that in practice.
Yeah, that's it's timely. I mean,
Hmm.
it's certainly timely, particularly in the last few years. We all read the news. It certainly feels like the world is increasingly disjointed, highly politicized. Um, we're unable to meet in the middle and have a conversation. We're focused on ourselves. Not to say that that's entirely negative. I mean, I'm sure that we are all struggling with countless things, whether it's, health or economic or job loss or, poverty situation here in Canada as well. I mean, not to say that focusing on yourself is overtly or entirely negative, but the inability to see your same suffering in someone else, for that to be a connection point, an unfortunate connection point, but a connection point nonetheless. Um, so many people experience heartache and hardship globally. And so when I think of the theme, strengthening global solidarity, empowering local communities, that to me really underscores the need to build a bridge, meet each other halfway, have a conversation. And as we've been talking about already, really empowering the voices of these local communities and respecting and honoring that we should be listening to their stories, to their solutions, to their needs, and really trust them in the process to lift themselves out of the dire situation that they may need, or sorry, the dire situation that they're in, with our help and the resources that come with being, a Canadian, or, having access to Canadian funding that we can funnel to, country X.
Hmm.
So that's what I think that means.
Yeah. Why do you think it is so challenging for people that may not have had that personal experience outside of Canada or in a developing country? Why is it so difficult to understand that? What's so interesting to me is like we live in a world where like we have access to everyone's story, so much information. We see images of everything all the time, probably arguably too much sometimes. And so it's just fascinating to me that we can have access to all of that, but there's still so much apathy to the plight of other people. And I'm just curious, is it like, do you see it as like there's just too much noise coming at people? Why is there so much difficulty in getting people to some, and not all the time, obviously lots of people care about global issues, but
Sure.
there does seem to be barriers there of like getting people
Sure.
past that.
We're not taking the time to connect. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but we are also so focused on our own needs and our own concerns. Like we don't have the space and the bandwidth. Maybe we don't have the emotional capacity or the stamina to care, so to
Mhm.
speak, um, about the plight or the situation of another person. Um, Sometimes it's geography, right? Like that person is way over there. I don't know where that country is. I have no experience. I'm not able to speak to that. Sometimes it's because, and I find this, sometimes it's because we are so insular in the communities that we socialize and live in, that we have a lack of understanding of what other people are
Mhm.
experiencing, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, I'll give you a personal example. But I have always been raised in quite diverse, whether it's ethnicity or religion or social status, etc. Um, I have different groups, and I engage with different people, right?
Mhm.
Diverse people. And so, for example, I teach Taekwondo a couple nights a week on the side in a primarily Arab school, right? So, countless times people walk in and they assume that I'm also Arab and speak to me in Arabic, dark hair, dark eyes.
Interesting.
And I have to correct them. And I'm like, no, I'm Portuguese. But there's that community. I know when the kids that I'm teaching can't perform to their best because it's Ramadan and so they're fasting, right? So I'm more intimately aware of these different calendars and these different moments in these kids' lives because I've been socialized in that way,
Mhm.
right?
That's
And
cool.
I don't hang out with or socialize with people who only look and sound and think like me.
Hmm.
Um, and we have to take effort to do that,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And if
work.
you
Yeah.
don't, it makes that connection and that understanding and that curiosity to learn more really difficult. And sometimes you're not aware of it, right? And this is where all of our biases come in and all that stuff, which we can go off on a tangent. But yeah, that's why I
So,
think it's important.
No, that's helpful. I think so. So for those of us that are seeing those things around the world and are being deeply impacted by it and want to make a difference, what can that look like for someone, maybe they're maybe listening to this. What can that look like for someone without maybe tons of money or
Hmm.
status that can get messages out there? How can the average person make an impact and feel like they're making an impact?
Sure. Knowledge is really important, right? I mean, we all spend far too much time on social media as it is, but follow someone who thinks of it differently than you. World Vision Canada has a great platform online. We profile lots of different countries and situations and crises all over the world. Get to know, our work and the work of this industry in that way. Talk to someone who is different than you. I mean, reach out to staff. I mean, even through church groups, I'm sure that we can get, some guest speakers and things like this to come in and just have a similar conversation like the one we're having to just connect folks with people who think differently or maybe who have been exposed to, the places and the thought that I've been exposed to who want to share that story. So, yeah, that's like exposing yourself to different outlets.
Is there anything, just in closing here, is there anything that you would like people to know that maybe is not as clear or obvious about humanitarian work and the things that you've seen?
I mean, I guess I'll start by saying human beings are on the other side of this work, right? We're called to do this work for various reasons. Naively, I would say that we're called to do this work because we want what's best for children and communities. I do this work because I want, all children to realize their fundamental human rights, their fundamental child rights, right? Like that's what's important to me. It's important for me to also take the time, and for all of us doing this work to take the time to rest and regroup, because this is not an easy climb. This mountain that we're climbing, it's not easy. And sometimes it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I mean, particularly when you look at the news of 2025, and the different things we're hearing of government cuts, and when you think about just different genocides ongoing in the world, it's really hard to feel like you're making any sort of difference when certain things seem to be moving backwards. So, I mean, all that to say, we're all human beings, and I think we all, at the end of the day, want what's best
Mhm.
for one another. But we also need to take time to rest and be sad when things aren't going well, and be encouraged by those particular stories that you hear, or the kids that I've been able to meet in my travels. Be encouraged by them.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for your time and the experience you bring, and for sharing the highs and lows of all of that. It means a lot, and it's great to be able to connect with you.
Yeah, no problem.